Who does name tags? Somebody made a name tag.
Welcome everyone. Hi everyone.
They put it on the wrong.
How are you
So I
guys?
didn't see it for a couple of days, and I'm like,
Make sure you guys sign in. The clipboard I think is backed by where I'm sitting in the back spot. I think there, Charlie has it. So welcome. We are going to be introducing SageView today, and they're going to be talking to us. Will Posh is our retirement advisor that is dedicated to our 403B account. And SageView is a company that we have hired to help us with our 403B account. They are our co-fiduciary, and they help us with our plans, plan investment options, and helping us with fees, you know, working with Fidelity. So they are definitely an unbiased group that helps us. They're definitely our reps. And so he's going to talk a little bit more about that. And then SageView is going to be coming out probably once a quarter. And well, there will be more opportunities for one-on-ones. I know that the list for today is full, but if you really want to talk to Will, he's available by phone or the one-on-ones. If you want to meet with him one-on-one, let me know. I'll put you on the waiting list for the next time that he's out here. So sit back, relax. There are refreshments, and you may want to ask questions throughout, and that's fine too. So, Will, take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks, Emily.
You're welcome.
I'm going to turn on my mic. Okay. Can you tell me that? Okay, there we go. Well, thank you very much, Emily. I appreciate the kind introduction. I'm going to stand here so I don't get a hot mic. But as Emily mentioned, I'm from SageView Advisory Group, and we are the Monterey Bay Aquarium 403B Plan Advisors. So we work with Monterey Bay to ensure that you and your beneficiaries, as participants in this plan, have a solid set of investment options from which to select. So I'm here today to talk to you about the plan, but even more importantly, some of you may have noticed in the news that we are undergoing some increased volatility in the markets. So I thought that I'd speak to you a little bit about that, because sometimes when the market starts to heat up and move sideways and even down, it gives us some pause to consider changing our investments in response to that volatility. So what I want to share with you is just some tried and true strategies such that, you know, when you get the urge to make a change to your portfolio, that you take a step back, look at it a little bit longer, and make an informed decision as opposed to snapping to an emotional decision. Okay? So if there's any questions, feel free to just ask them. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. And then, as Emily mentioned, the last slide in the presentation, I talked a little bit about some of the services that we can provide to you free of cost. They're available to you just as a participant in the plan. And we'll go into that a little bit, okay? Does that sound like one? Everybody? Okay, super. So from the standpoint of what we're going to discuss, who's the 403B team? You may not know, but there's a lot going behind the background in terms of making this plan work. It's a tax advantage plan. So there are a couple of key members that are responsible for ensuring that the plan complies with all the regulations set out by the Department of Labor and the Internal Revenue Service. We'll go through that, talk about the plans and the features, the benefits of the plan, and then the importance of saving for your future, then the investments, asset allocation, managing market volatility, and then, as I mentioned earlier, how we can help you. Okay? So from the standpoint of who SageView is, I know that Emily gave you a nice introduction of who we are, but for you, let's talk a little bit about who we are. We are a registered investment advisory firm, and we are have been hired by Monterey Bay as a co-fiduciary, 321 fiduciary, which means that we stand on the same side of the table as you, the participant in the plan. We're completely agnostic as to what investment funds the plan utilizes. They just have to comply with an investment policy statement that we've put into place for the plan. We have a national footprint. We have a number of offices across the country. We continue to keep on growing. And from the standpoint of awards and accolades, we're receiving tons of them every year. We were voted one of the top advisors from Plan Advisor magazine for 2017. We have increased about to $84 billion of assets under management, and we serve 1,000 clients nationwide. What's important about this is that retirement, 401k management, retirement is all we do, or 403b in this case, is all we do. So we're very specialized, and we put all our resources towards advising our clients such that they have a successful retirement plan for which the participants can benefit from. So I mentioned that there is a team in place for you guys. And the first is the Retirement Benefits Committee. And that is comprised of a couple of members of management that meet with SageView Advisory Group and Fidelity on a quarterly basis, where we go over the funds and we advise the committee on the performance of the funds, as well as really what's happening with those funds over the course of the year and then over an expanded time frame, 3, 5, and 10-year period. We have an investment policy statement that we put into place with the plan that defines the criteria by which the funds have to meet. And so when we meet with the committee, decisions are made on behalf of the participants as to if a fund is violating the investment policy statement, which funds will be removed, and which funds will be replaced in their stead. The SageView Advisory Group, that is us. We're a registered investment advisor at 321, which means that we're a co-fiduciary, which means that we have liability for the recommendations that we make on your behalf. We also provide the committee with plan design advice. So we want to make sure that this plan is a great plan that attracts and keeps talent with Monterey Bay Aquarium. And then Fidelity is the record keeper and the plan administrator. You may have heard of Fidelity. January Jones, I believe, comes out on a quarterly basis, and we speak with her. They're really behind the scenes. They're the ones that are ensuring that the deferrals that you make from your paycheck make it to the plan and that are allocated in the investments that you've selected. Okay. And then from the administration perspective, they make sure that the plan is following all the rules associated with a tax-qualified plan. So by following these rules and complying, it means that you get to defer to the plan on a pre-tax basis, enjoy the tax-deferred growth. Or if you're contributing, actually this plan does not have Roth. So the benefits are that you get to contribute pre-tax, which is quite a benefit. And then lastly, Trucker House is the plan legal advisor. They're the ones that drew up the plan document, which really dictates how the plan is to be run, eligibility, hardship, withdrawals, and whatnot. Okay. Any questions about the team that's in place? No? Okay, pretty simple, straightforward. Let's just quickly go into the plan features. This plan is an automatic enrollment plan. Once you're here, it's an immediate eligibility, and you only need to be, I believe, 21. But participants are automatically enrolled in the plan at 4% of their compensation. Okay. You will be sent a letter, as you probably were, that unless you opt out, you're going to be automatically enrolled in the plan, which is super, because I can tell you from having spoken to a number of participants across plans that you say you're going to join the plan, and then life gets in the way, and it becomes very hard. And the next thing you know, you've been with the company 2 or 3 years, and you haven't joined the plan. So it's very proactive, and I think that employers are very happy with automatic enrollment because it does something for them to get them into the plan. For those individuals that were hired after March 1st of last year, that were automatically enrolled, there is an automatic increase program that was put into place, and that will increase a deferral from 4 to 5%, and then so on every year by 1% to a cap of 10%. Okay, so this really allows individuals to contribute more to the plan without really having to make that active choice. We as a society are facing some significant problems as it relates to saving for retirement. So this is a way to help individuals increase their savings and hopefully get to the point where they can retire at some point. Again, participants can opt out of this if they wish. So for 2018, the amount that you can contribute to the plan, the maximum amount is $18,500. Okay. If you're going to be age 50 in 2018, even if it's on December 31st, you can contribute an extra $6,000 to the plan. That's a catch-up. Okay. So under 50, it's 18.5. Over 50, or 50 and older, it's 24,500. Okay. You can change your contributions at any time. You can go to 0 if you wish. I highly discourage you to do so. But if you want to make a change up or down in the amount that you contribute to the plan, you can do that anytime. It usually takes about 2 pay periods to become effective. So please give payroll your patience in terms of making that change. You can take a loan. You can have one loan outstanding at any time. This is where you are looking to pay for something that you just don't have money for. There's no underwriting associated with taking a loan from the plan. However, it should be noted that if you do take a loan, you're going to pay yourself back with interest, number one. Number two, when you pay yourself back, you're using after-tax dollars to pay yourself back. And when you take a distribution at retirement, that money comes out as ordinary taxable income at whatever the rates you're at when you retire. So you can see that it can be fairly costly. The other concern is that you have an outstanding loan and you leave Monterey Bay Aquarium for any reason. You're going to have very limited time in which to pay the loan back. Any amount outstanding past your tax filing date is going to be subject to ordinary income tax rates, and if you're younger than 59 and a half at the time, it's going to be subject to a 10% federal penalty and a 2.5% state and local excise tax. Okay? So a lot of times, people don't expect to be laid off or quit or fired, and to add insult to injury, now you have this loan that you have to pay back and potentially a huge tax bill. Okay? Any questions so far? Yes?
The 10% thing that you mentioned in the automatic increase, this is just about the automatic increase. This has nothing to do with 10% of your pay and the 18,500. That's totally two separate things, right? Like you can't max 10% or 18,500.
So the good question. The automatic increase program of 10%, typically the industry has a cap of 10%. They don't want to take too much of an individual's take-home pay. So they cap it at 10%. The 18,500 or the 24.5 is what we call the 402G limit, 18,500. That's the max you can put in. But if you're age 50 or older, because you're older, because you're approaching retirement, because you may not have had access to a retirement plan in the past, the government's allowing you to put an extra $6,000 in. So 10%, to answer your question, is not related necessarily to the 18.5 unless 10% happens to be 18,500.
Yeah, I wish, but okay.
Okay, super. Okay, and then from the standpoint of hardship distributions, sometimes in life situations happen that we don't expect, and those situations tend to cost money. So in cases where you're facing eviction or foreclosure on your primary residence, you have healthcare expenses not covered by insurance, you're looking to go back to school for a post-secondary education, you have funeral costs. If you're in a part of the country that has a natural disaster like the fires last year in Santa Rosa or the hurricane in Texas last year, you can actually take money from the plan to pay for that hardship. But unlike the loan where you don't have an underwriting requirement, there is kind of an underwriting component to the hardship. You actually have to prove that you're facing this hardship. So in the case of eviction or foreclosure, you'd have to show Monterey Bay Aquarium either that eviction notice or that notice of foreclosure. You'd have to provide Monterey Bay Aquarium with your tuition receipt. Okay. If you're approved, which you would be, you can take money from the plan to pay for that expense. The key here is that it comes out as ordinary income, subject to ordinary tax rates at the time. And if you're younger than 59 and a half at the time, you're subject to that penalty of 10% federal, 2.5% state and local excise tax. Okay. But in some cases, there's no other alternative. So just because you're contributing to the plan doesn't mean that this money is 100% locked up. It's just that Monterey Bay Aquarium, the federal government, doesn't want you to use this as an ATM machine, right? Because this is for your retirement. Okay. Now this is the part that I really like to talk about. Monterey Bay Aquarium is a very unique employer in the fact that it provides a very, very generous match. And not only does it provide a match, but it also provides an employer contribution. So the automatic enrollment gets you to 4%, okay? And that is the match. So if you contribute 4%, Monterey Bay is going to match dollar for dollar up to that 4%. So you're already at 8%, which is super, okay? But then they go above and beyond and contribute another 6% to your 403B, which is unheard of. I mean, that is really generous. So basically, you put in 4%, and the contribution on your behalf in the plan is 14%. So when you look at what is really needed to prepare for retirement, to replace that income while you've been working in retirement, they say anywhere from about 10 to 15%. So, you know, by putting 4%, you guys are already there. So that's super. Now, this money isn't 100% yours the moment they put it into your account. It's subject to a vesting schedule. And vesting really just means ownership. Okay? So you're always 100% vested in the contributions that you guys make on your own behalf. Okay? But the match and the contribution, the employer contribution, is subject to a 6-year graded vesting schedule. Okay? And it starts from your date of hire, not from when you enter into the plan. In fact, I was talking to someone this morning that said, you know, I've been with the company for 13 years. Am I vested? And I said, it's from your date of hire. They're like, oh, awesome. You know, because they thought, I'm going to have to be in this plan for 6 years before I'm vested. But if you've been with Monterey for 6 years, you're already 100% vested. Yes?
Can you just clarify for us, if I've elected to put in 10% on my own, then what is the match that MBA is providing?
They're going to give you 10.
Okay, so then that would be equivalent to 20%.
Absolutely.
Sweet.
Yeah, it's totally sweet. Yes.
Can you share with us if you're under 6 years, what happens to the money?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Great question. So in essence, what happens is, from your date of hire, remember, you vest at 20, well, in this case, that should be 40, I believe. So it should be 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. So you vest at 20% a year. And should you leave prior to attaining that 6 years of service, let's say you leave in the 4th year, okay? So you're going to have to, what they call, forfeit back 40% of that 10% that Monterey is giving you. It goes back to the plan. It goes to what's called a forfeiture account, and then it's used to either provide future match for participants, or it can be used to offset fees incurred by the plan, like an audit expense or other costs. Yes?
So if we look at what our investment is in Fidelity, and we leave before that 6 years, then that figure's not really what we have. You're forfeiting back what the NBA.
Yes, so there'll be both a vested and an unvested balance that you can see.
Oh,
Yeah, so there's not a lot of guesswork in it.
Oh.
It's like, you know, at any given time you can go on to net benefits and you can see what your vested account balance is, and then you also see an unvested account.
but our contributions 100% doesn't matter.
Absolutely, nobody can take those away from you. But it's also worth noting that the match dollars, the contribution dollars, and your deferrals are invested by you. You get to direct how those dollars are invested. Any other questions about the match? This is a super match. I would say that of 15, 20 years I've been in this industry, I've never seen a match this rich. So that doesn't mean that you shouldn't put in 10%. I'd still put in 10% to get that 20, yes.
I guess just a clarification of the text on the screen there. It says MB may make 6%. What's the may?
Good one. So the will on the top for the match, it's actually hard-coded in the plan. Okay, so if you look at the adoption agreement that was put together, it says, we will match you, which means that they're on the hook to make that match. Okay. The may means that it's discretionary. But up to this point, Monterey Bay has been making this contribution. What it does is it if for some reason there's a budgeting shortfall or what happens, they can always say, this year, unfortunately, we can't do it. But I haven't seen that. Emily, has there ever been a period where that's been the case?
It's always been 10.
Yeah. So I wanted to hedge my bet just a little bit there. I didn't want to say will be. So. Okay? Are we good? Okay, super. All right, well, let's talk about the benefits of saving early. And since this is an automatic enrollment plan, I don't think there's anyone in here that's not currently part of the plan. Is that true? Okay, so you may be asking, well, why are you talking to me about saving early? If we're all in the plan, you know, it's already done. And the reason why I want to bring this up is the power of tax-deferred growth is really amazing, okay? If you have two savings accounts, one's tax-deferred and one's just a regular after-tax account, the growth potential for the tax-deferred account is much greater because you don't have to pay taxes on the growth each year. It's not like taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Okay? It's unleashed, if you will. But the key here is using time as an asset as opposed to being a liability. We can never go back in time to change things, right? We can only look forward. Okay? So the key here is to save as early as you possibly can. And I show you through these different examples here, you have these people that start contributing from 25 to 65, 30 years. And they're going to be obviously in the best shape, right? And then you have an individual that contributes from 25 to 35, stops, only contributes for 10 years. You would think, well, that person's not going to be in very good shape, only 10 years of contribution. Well, the fact is even though that person stops contributing to the plan, that money doesn't stop working for that person. So in essence, the money that you contributed to the plan early in your career or when you were younger is the most valuable money you will ever possess because it's had the most time to work on your behalf. Now, really, the real reason why I put this slide in is because the earlier you start contributing to your 403B, the less risk you have to take as an investor. Okay, so you can see that these donuts, I guess you would call, show you that on the top there, the person who contributed from 25 to 65 only contributed $200,000, but if you look at the donut there on top, most of that donut, or 76% of it, is growth. Okay? Look at the person who contributed from, let's see, it's 35 to 65. They put in 150. They still have fairly significant growth, but not as much. Okay? And then if you look at this person right here, from 25 to 35, just 10 years, 88% of their portfolio value is due to growth. Okay? So please start early. Yeah, you know, if you know that you're not putting in enough, even with the match and the employer contribution, you can do more. Do it, because down the road, it either means that you can take less risk or you can contribute less as you get older. Does that make sense? Okay, super. Okay, I'm just going to take a quick poll here. How many people plan to retire at age 65? Okay, 3?
Earlier.
Oh, okay, I should say, how many people think they're going to retire before 65? Okay. How many people think they're going to retire after 65? Okay, so it's kind of even. Okay. The reason why I asked this question is because it has to do with expectations from the standpoint of when we expect to retire. They did a poll, this is the Employee Benefit EBRI, along with Greenwald and Associates in 2017, where they asked individuals just like yourself, when do you plan to retire? And an overwhelming response was, you know, I plan to retire at age 65, right? And then they went and they talked to individuals that are currently in retirement, and they asked them, you know, when did you retire? And a matter of fact was that they retired prior to age 65. Okay? If you look at the expected age 65 was the median retirement age, what the actual age was, the median half above and half below, was age 62. And one of the largest cited reasons was health problems, disability, caring for somebody that is ill. The reason why I bring this up is we live in the Bay Area. We live in one of the most expensive places on earth, I would argue, right? So a lot of times when we're thinking about saving for retirement, we're thinking, well, that's at age 65 or later. I can attend to that later in life, right? But the fact of the matter is you know, we want to buy a house. We want to, you know, have a family. We want to enjoy ourselves, right? But our thought of saving after we attain those goals may not necessarily work out, because if we're actually retiring or forced out of the labor force prior to expectations, that time frame in which you thought you were going to be able to save may not necessarily be there. Okay? So the key here is starting early, as much as you possibly can, because that gives you the ability to, take some of the foot off of the accelerator later in life, if you're on goal or on par to reach your goal. Okay, so let's talk about the market. Anybody losing sleep at all? You're losing sleep? Okay. Anybody a little nervous or queasy? Okay, that makes sense, right? I mean, you guys work hard every day, come to work on time, put in a full day's work to generate that paycheck, and some of that paycheck goes into your plan. So when we see the market sell off and we see those balances go down, that gives us some concern. In fact, it's been shown that participants feel the pain of market losses twice as much as they do the joy of market gains. Right? Okay. So the last 10 years, we're in our 10th year. March 9th, 2009 was the inflection point of the bear market for the sell-off, the Great Recession. We've had, believe it or not, a pretty amazing comeback. We're over 300% from the bottom. What we may have forgotten in that 10-year period is that volatility is a normal characteristic of the market. I think we've been lulled by the fact that the market's been pretty easygoing for the last 10 years. But we have these periods where there's some concern. You may remember the taper tantrum back in 2014, right? You may remember the Brexit, right? You may remember 2016 January where the market lost 11.2%, right? And then this February where the market lost over 10%. Okay, so there's been some corrections. It's just that the market tends to go up after it, and we've said no big deal. There are some concerns and there is some uncertainty right now. And they're fairly major, right? And the market hates uncertainty. Right? Doesn't care about bad news, because with bad news, at least we kind of know what's going on. But the uncertainty, we can't make any assumptions about that, and so the market doesn't like that, and as a result, it sells off. So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what's driving the volatility. And the first is inflation and interest rates. Okay? So you may have heard recently that we're at 4.1 unemployment, okay, which is the broadest measure. I should say the least broad measure of employment, which means that we're almost at full employment. Okay? You may have also heard that wages picked up. Okay? And so what's happening is there are a lot of trades in place based upon the low interest rates. Think about the mortgage rates. Okay? Those have gone up. The mortgage market has kind of slowed down, believe it or not. And so as a result, the way that we combat inflation, okay, when things are overheating, things are getting more expensive, is the Federal Reserve comes in and starts raising interest rates on the short-term interest rates. So you may have noticed that if you have a credit card, your interest rate may have gone up. If you have an equity line of credit, your interest rate went up. Okay? So they're slowing things down. And if rates are going up, that's changing the assumptions that investors have. If you've been borrowing money to invest it in this market that seems to be going higher every day, you are now changing your assumptions about how you're going to invest. You may have to now put more money forth in order to have that margin account. And that is problematic. The fact that interest rates are going up means that those investors that were averse to being in riskier asset classes like stocks are now saying, hey, I don't have to be in the stock market to get that yield that I was searching for. Interest rates are going up. I think I'll get out of that riskier asset and invest in the fixed income market. Okay? That effect has a sell-off associated with it. Okay? Geopolitical risk. Now, I know that last year, it seemed as if the market was just completely could care less about what was happening geopolitically. In fact, North Korea shoots missiles over Japan, and the market goes up by 200 points, right? Crazy. Well, it seems as though gravity has returned back to the marketplace. And there's some real tension with Asia. We talk about the trade wars that are getting underway with China, North Korea, that's problematic, okay? And then with Russia, okay? And the sanctions that we just put into place with Russia. We don't know how that's going to play out. That's uncertainty, okay? If you are an importer of Chinese products and there's tariffs, that just hit your business. You're just affected by that. Your confidence is now not so high. Okay. Economic growth and outlook. Well, we were doing fairly okay before Trump. You know, it was fairly tepid economic growth. You may have heard of gross domestic product. That's basically a broad measure of output for the United States. But we started to really tick up. Okay. We hit about 3% on GDP. But now it's been revised down to about 2.7. Doesn't seem like a big deal. But it's, you know, the stock market is a discounting mechanism, which means that it's looking 6 to 9 months forward. Okay, so if the market's selling off today, that may be indicating that there's some perceived weakness in the future. Okay. And one of those things that's going to cause that growth outlook to be negative is if interest rates go too high. Okay? So investors don't like to be left holding the empty bag. So it's really a race to get out of the market as fast as you can when you believe that things are bad. And then I also mentioned tariffs and trade. Okay. So we've been experiencing very low volatility for a while. I would look at what we're experiencing right now as just the return of normalcy in the market. Okay. We had a nice ride for about 10 years. But the fact of the matter is volatility for a long-term investor shouldn't be considered a negative thing. Okay? This slide here shows you basically the intra-year declines in the market. So the red numbers represent how far the market sold off in any given year. And then the gray bars show what the ending return of the market was for that particular year. So you can see that there's a lot of red, which means that during the year, a lot of people's confidence was tested, right? And if you sold out, let's just show this year right here. If you sold out after that sell-off, you actually lost 19% of your portfolio's value. But if you held on, you had the conviction that your portfolio was structured correctly, you actually had a 27% return in the market. So to the long-term investor, volatility is actually a good thing because it allows you to take advantage of dislocation in the market and buy things at discount. Now I know that we all love discounts. We go to the store, we look at tomatoes, and you know, I was at the store last week, buying ripened tomatoes for $1.49 a pound. Right? They're usually $4 a pound. So I loaded up on those tomatoes because I knew it was a great value. Everything is that way except the market. It's counterintuitive. Everyone thinks that it's only great when the market's going up. But what that means is that every time your paycheck hits, you're buying securities at a higher price. Okay? You guys are long-term investors. So when you see these spikes down, that actually represents an excellent opportunity for you to pick up additional shares of those mutual funds at a discount. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, great. Sorry? Buy low and sell high. I've got a slide about that for a second. So from the standpoint of how we invest, you may have heard me say bulletproof or constructed correctly portfolio. The fact of the matter is we have to use time as a determinant as to how we are allocating our nest egg among different investment classes. So in this case, we're talking about stocks, bonds, and cash. And from the standpoint of our time horizon, that's largely going to drive how we're invested among those three asset classes. Okay? So if you have not a very long time between now and the date that you're going to retire, it's important that your portfolio looks that way as well. You don't want to be necessarily allocated to stocks 100%, 50%, even 40%. Right? Because if the market sells off, well, you may not necessarily get to retire this year. You may have to work an extra year or two to get back to where you were. Okay. Conversely, if you're younger and you have a long runway between now and when you're going to retire, well, we know that stocks have a higher rate of return relative to bonds and cash over the long term. So why not take advantage of that high rate of return, knowing that if the market sells off, well, either we just pick up additional shares at a discount, okay, knowing that historically speaking, the market has returned back to its positive slope, and then benefit from that. If you're somewhere in the middle, you need the buoyancy of bonds to keep your portfolio volatility not so high. Okay, so bonds, bonds, you invest in bonds, it's really, you're borrowing or you're lending money to an individual that is borrowing money from you, and they promise to pay you back at a later date plus interest. Okay. It also helps from a diversification perspective. So just to show you the 1 year volatility, if you're invested in stocks, it's possible for you to gain 47%. That's super. We've loved that. That's what we've seen the last 9 years. But it's also possible to lose about 40% of your portfolio value. So if you have, 5 years between now and the date of your retirement, you can't afford to take that volatility. Right? But look at how that volatility shrinks over time as you go out on the time continuum. In fact, it's not even negative at all. You have a 7% lower end and a 17% top end. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Super. So with this volatility, I've heard a number of individuals, and it hasn't been like this since 2009, when I get calls from participants saying, look, I can't handle this roller coaster ride, I'm having a hard time sleeping, my wife won't even talk to me anymore because that's all I talk about, and I want to get out of this. And I would always tell them, make sure your portfolio is in line with your time horizon and then your risk tolerance, and you should be fine. Don't get out of the market. And the reason being is market timing, getting in at the low point, getting out at the high point, is virtually impossible to do. Okay? Do you remember on Friday, the market was down big, 500 points, right? And then Monday it was up 400 points. And then we talked about bombing Syria, and it went down to about 45. And then it was up, and now it's down. Okay? The problem with getting out of the market is it's easy to sell out of your portfolio and go to cash. But what is it going to take to get you to have the conviction to get back into the market? Okay? And to show you how it can really destroy the value of your portfolio, if you look at the S&P 500, which is a broad market index of large cap stocks, you may have heard of them, GE, Wells Fargo, they're the big names. If you invested $10,000 for 20 years from 1998 to basically the end of last year, your annualized return would be about 7.2%. Now, if you just missed the 10 best days in that 20-year period, it's going to move your annualized return down to 3.53%. Okay? If you miss the 20 best days, you're going to have a 1.15 return. You might as well invest in a certificate of deposit at the bank where there's no risk. Okay? The key here is that if you look at the 10 best days in the market, it happened within 2 weeks of the 10 worst days. So typically when the market gets slammed, a couple of days later, that's where you get what we call dead cat bounce. Okay? It's where bottom feeders come in and support the market. So the key here is really create a portfolio allocation that's in line with your time horizon and your risk tolerance, in that order. Okay. What we're seeing these days, unfortunately, is older individuals who got burned in 2009 are not conservative enough because they're trying to get back what they lost. And then their kids, who are coming into the workforce now, are not taking up enough risk because they saw the trauma that their parents went through. They're like, forget about it. And it should be flipped on its head. Okay? So the key here is asset allocation and diversification. Okay? So the key to diversification is investing in different asset classes across the board. So you're not beholden to the performance of a single asset class. Okay? So you can see that a great slide with pretty colors. I don't want you to focus on trying to read these. These are basically just represent asset classes. So you can see that for 2003, emerging market equity was the top performer. Okay? And then in 2017, again, emerging market equity was the top performer. But that purple color, you can see that it moves all around. You know, it's down here, it's in the middle there. It's right here. Let's see. There. So what I'm getting at is it changes from year to year. If you're in emerging markets this year or 2003, you're doing great. But emerging markets was near the bottom of the pack for the last 24 months. So if you only have one investment in an asset class, it's going to potentially be a problem. By investing in a number of different asset classes, you won't be at the top of the chart in 1 year, but more importantly, you won't be at the bottom. The key here is diversification allows you to float kind of around the middle, and it reduces your risk. Yes?
Oh, we can get a copy of this presentation.
I think Emily's going to put it on the intranet.
Okay.
Yeah. Any questions so far? Okay, we are almost finished. So somebody said buy low and sell high. I think it was you, right?
It's something Warren Buffett said.
Warren Buffett said. Perfect. Well, it's good advice. But how many people do you think buy low and sell high?
We do the opposite.
The opposite.
They're good.
That's right. Most people buy high and sell low, right? And it's due to the fact that we're emotional individuals, right? It's either fear or greed that drives our decisions. Okay? So wouldn't it be nice if we could somehow stick to a method of buying low and selling high? Right? And it's called rebalancing. It's something that all investors should do. Investment professionals do it all the time. And the way that it works is an individual buys, let's say, a stock, right? And typically what happens is, they buy it at the top because, hey, this stock is, outperforming. It's great. Think about Facebook, a couple of years after, it had its issues. Everybody wanted to get in. It drove from $28 to $172, right? If you were buying on the way up, you're buying at the height, right? And then all of a sudden, Facebook loses 12%, right? And you're like, oh my God, I got to get out of the stock. Well, instead of getting out of it at the top, you're getting out at the bottom, right? You're trying to market time it. Okay, well, things seem as though they're maybe getting straightened out. Zuckerberg was talking to Congress yesterday. The stock bounced, 4%. You say, okay, that's great. I think I want to buy back in, right? And then who knows what happens, with the House testimony today. It may tank. The problem here is you're getting in at the top, you're getting in at the bottom. Or you're getting out at the bottom. We want to turn that on its head, get in at the bottom, get out of the top. The way we do that is through rebalancing. We pick a date in the calendar, and we unemotionally go in and we say, we're going to return our percentages that we invest in, stocks versus bonds versus cash, back to their initial percentages when we first started in the plan. Because remember, market action is going to change the percentages in our portfolio. If you're a 50-50% portfolio, 50% to stocks, 50% to fixed income, because the market's been doing so well, maybe 60% of your portfolio is now stock and 40% is fixed income. So by going in and rebalancing, you're basically shaving off the profits of those winners, and then you're reallocating those profits back into the losers. Okay? It gets you back to your 50-50, but it also systematically allows you to take profits at the top and buy at the bottom. Now, chances are, some of you are doing some rebalancing, but others are not. Okay? So this brings me really to the investments that you have offered to you in the plan. And the first is you can choose a single, let's go to build your own portfolio first. You can choose it from a diversified combination of individual funds, okay, that we vet on a quarterly basis on your behalf. Or you can choose a ready or single mixed fund that does it all for you. So let's take a quick look at the core fund line. You can see that within stock there are multiple styles. So we have large, we have mid, we have small, we have value, we have blend, and we have growth.
This is what's available to us right now.
This is what's available to you if you wanted to use the core fund lineup. Okay? So you can see there's a lot of names there, right? And it looks kind of overwhelming. And we're working with the committee to really kind of rein in, you know, the number of funds that are available to you. Because sometimes, like, look at that large blend. You have 3 funds there, you know, and over-analysis can create paralysis, right? So the key here is we want to choose a fund from really each box and weight it accordingly. We want some fixed income exposure, we want some capital preservation, we have some international exposure, and then we have some real estate. Yes?
Does responsible index mean socially responsible?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, we just, that had been in the plan, and we wanted to have participants have access to mid and small, so we added the Calvert US Mid Cap Core. It currently has 0 assets in it, though. Nobody utilizes it. So the key here is to create a portfolio that utilizes most of those funds available. Okay? To periodically rebalance it. Okay? And then as you approach, you know, as you go through your career, to change up the asset allocation, to reduce your exposure to stocks in favor of fixed income, right? Because your runway is short. Okay? That takes a lot of time. It takes persistence, and it takes discipline. You're telling me that you want me to lock in the profits of the winners and put them into the losers? That's crazy, right? But it's important. So from the standpoint of finding time, I know we're all incredibly busy, right? From the standpoint of family, if you have a family, that can take a lot of your time. Your career, we're all focused on our careers. Household, you know, the lawn has to get mowed, dishwasher has to get emptied. And typically what happens is the one part of the puzzle that doesn't get addressed is the retirement planning portion. So you may have chosen your asset allocation when you started with Monterey Bay, but if you're like a lot of participants, chances are you haven't checked it in a couple of years. Remember, what the market gives you can take away in the course of a very short period of time. So there are these funds that are available to you in the plan that really do all of that for you. And the Fidelity Freedom Funds. And what this is it's a one-stop shop, set it and forget it. Okay? To use a term that I saw on TV, one-stop shop, remember that? Ronco? Does that ring a bell with anybody? Yeah? Okay. And the way that it works is you choose a date in the future that you plan to retire. So for instance, with me, it'd be 2035. That's the only decision I make. Put 100% of my deferrals into that one fund that is managed to a 2035 retirement date. And the way that it works is we know that stocks, relative to cash and bonds, historically have a higher rate of return. Okay? They also have higher volatility inherent. But remember, we have such a long runway that we can weather the sell-offs. It actually makes sense because we're buying at a discount. So as we're in the beginning part of our career, we're going to have more exposure to equities or stocks. However, as we start approaching retirement, the Freedom Fund managers are going to start increasing your allocation to fixed income because your runway is shorter. Okay? Such that when you retire at age 65, you still have an overweighting to equity relative to fixed income. But as you are in retirement, you now become an income fund and then a capital preservation fund. So the allocation is dynamically moving with you through your career. Okay? And the way that it works is you can see this heat map. It shows you that it invests in domestic equity, international equity, and then you have some fixed income. Okay? And with this, you have tons of investments. Yes?
So I apologize, it's probably just a few clicks on Fidelity's website, but most of my funds are allocated to a Fidelity Freedom. How is there a way I can go in there and see what the fund manager is doing and on a quarterly basis in terms of his or her
Absolutely.
changes?
Yeah, you can either go on to net benefits and click on it.
Yeah.
You can go to Morningstar, which is a free site, morningstar.com, which is, believe it or not, we have access to a bunch of paid subscriptions, and I go to www.morningstar.com because I think it's one of the best sites out there for information. You can go there, or you can actually go to fidelity.com, or just put in Fidelity Freedom Funds,
Right.
and then it'll show you what they're invested in, the constituent funds, the allocation percentages, a little bit about the managers. If you go,
I'm sorry, can you see how that's been adjusted over time? Or is it just a snapshot?
It'll give you a snapshot.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this will show you that they're managing basically 25 years to basically age 90. That's unfortunately when they think that you're going to pass away. But you can see that there's dynamic asset allocation. So this is really a solution for individuals that just don't have the time, interest, wherewithal, or knowledge to make investment decisions. And most importantly, don't have the discipline to go in and rebalance periodically. Okay. Don't be that person that calls me 18 months from retirement saying, I just lost 10% of my portfolio, I'm retiring in 18 months. Why is that? And I said, well, when's the last time you made changes? And they said, 20 years ago, right? Okay. So last slide here, you guys have been very good about letting me talk. As a participant in the plan, you have access to me. You can call me, you can email me. My information is here. That number is my desk line. You're not going to get anyone but me. Feel free to email me if you have questions. Am I diversified? Hey, I heard what you said about freedom funds. I don't think that's for me. Can you give me some ideas of how I might want to invest if I'm age 50, I've got 15 years to retirement, or hey, I have this 401k balance or 403 balance at a prior employer. Can we talk about an asset allocation strategy that takes that into account? I'm not the person to call if you just apply for a loan. You're looking for the status of that loan. That's Fidelity. But I'm here to help you back from the ledge in times of market volatility to keep you there. We can also kind of take a look at your portfolio, see if there's concentrated positions, if you're undiversified or non-diversified. So feel free to give me a call at any time. Typically what I'll do is, find about an hour on the calendar. We can just sit and talk by phone, of course. Any questions at all?
Any question?
Yeah.
So, like I have Fidelity as a fund manager and stuff, like they are taking care of a bunch of my funds, but they can't really do much with our 403.
Right.
They can look at it, but they can't really advise on it because of our policy and stuff. Can you look at funds that are not just the 403 and give advice on those outside funds?
Good question. So the first is, we can't give you advice, but we can give you guidance.
Okay.
So someone who's age 50 that has very similar characteristics such as yourself may want to consider, right? But it's like, so, yeah, definitely. So a lot of times what will happen is a participant will call me and say, hey, I want to just kind of take a global view of my portfolio. And I'll say, send me your statements, or maybe, give me an idea of what you're invested in. And typically I'll say, okay, draw a tic-tac-toe box and we'll go through it. This is, if you notice, let me go back here. I'll say, because this, if you look at it, it looks like a tic-tac-toe box without the lines. I'll say, you have a lot of your assets in a large value. Why? What's the reasoning behind it? Well, I didn't know. And I'll say, but that looks like a concentrated position. Growth has outperformed value, almost 4 to 1 in the past 2 years. You missed out on that. Let's talk about moving, some of your Monterey Bay assets into this, or going on to your other accounts and making those changes. So yes, short answer is yes. Yes.
Are the Fidelity Freedom Funds only made up of these two, or they're made up of whatever?
Excellent question. So Fidelity Freedom Funds, like a lot of target date fund providers like American Funds, T. Rowe Price, JP Morgan, they use JP Morgan, Fidelity, American Funds as their constituent funds. Yeah, so I don't have it on this deck, but I have it on my computer. It'll show all the funds that comprise the target date fund.
But
They're all Fidelity.
all Fidelity, so they could be that mid-cap 500 contra fund. And
There will
other
definitely be,
ones.
so it'll most likely be Fidelity New Insights, which is Contra Fund's sister, if you will.
Okay.
Fund, it's the same. Will Danoff is the manager, same fund, just different. That's, it's kind of silly how they did it, but yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm wondering if you're familiar with the recent article in Reuters.
Yep.
Regarding risk of Fidelity Freedom Funds relative to other target date funds.
Absolutely. Yeah, so some of you may have seen or know about that article that Reuters put out. We met with Fidelity to discuss this, to see exactly what was going on. Basically what the article had discussed was that Fidelity had been underperforming for years, and as a result, to try and stem outflows of dollars from their funds, they decided to have more equity exposure or exposure to stocks. They took overexposure positions in emerging markets, riskier parts of the markets. Is that the one you're referring to? Yeah, so basically what it comes down to is if you talk to any portfolio manager, you're never going to have a static investment allocation. Right? So if you look at the Fidelity Freedom Funds right now, they're underweight U.S. domestic equity. They're overweight Europe, and they have, yes, an overweight to emerging markets. But if you look at where emerging markets are in Europe is relative to the United States, if you're looking at it just from 5 years ago to today, and you're comparing, you're like, well, what's going on? Are they taking on more risk than they need to because they're trying to create more performance and as a result more risk? Or are you looking at the valuations of those particular asset classes? The United States look pretty expensive relative to emerging markets. In Europe, they're about 5 years behind us in terms of the economic cycle. So are you going to, as a portfolio manager, stay invested in an expensive market or look for alternative opportunities at a discount?